Hello, welcome to this week's episode. I am so happy to introduce you to Samantha Gadsden, who is my guest for this week. Sam, hello, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, where to start? Hi, Sally Ann. I'm Samantha Gadsden. I'm a doula, antenatal teacher, hypnobirthing teacher, birth trauma witch, as I like to call myself. I run the They Said to Me birth activism page and co-host the Birth Activist podcast. And I also run the Home Birth Support Group UK, a free birth course in a group, and a whole series of other parenting stroke life journey group called The Village, and some doing groups, some with other doulas and some on my own. So quite a lot, really,
A lot,
that I do.
Well done. And you're kind of like a hero of mine, because I see what you do within the home birth support group community that you have. And it's just such a safe space for women and pregnant people to go to, and I'm very grateful that you offer that to the people in this country, and presumably maybe even further afield. But it is such a wonderful place. So, as you have such a high volume of pregnant people in your groups who are giving birth at home, what do you think has been the most common concern in the last 12 months regarding the COVID situation, the withdrawal of home birth services, and things like that? Would you like to start there?
Well, what I have observed, obviously last March when we first entered the first lockdown, was very different to now. And there was a huge level of fear, although fear is still present. COVID is not new now. The English trusts in the main responded by closing down home birth services. And what I found as well is those areas that were still running home birth services were very coercive in their practices, mostly, obviously not all, but in the vast majority of cases, what we found is even where home birth on paper was being supported, it wasn't. Women were just being high risk out of home birth. And for me, women, what changed at the start of COVID a year ago in my group, we've gone from 2,500 members to nearly 7,500 members in a year, and most of those members are active, is that prior to that, all of the people who joined the Home Birth Support Group UK were people who had a particular interest in home birth. They wanted to home birth as a philosophical or a physical choice, whereas what we have now is women and birthing people who more don't want to birth in hospital because of the fear of COVID, because of the risks of hospital acquired COVID, because of things like that, which I feel are being dismissed. So there's not one answer. That wasn't a one answer.
No, but it's really interesting to hear why people are changing their minds. People who may have originally thought that home birth was a ridiculous idea are now actually saying, well, let me explore this a bit more. They're finding your group, they're finding their voices, and they're voting with their feet and actually choosing to give birth at home. And sometimes, if there is no medical support available to them, they're actually choosing to have births without medical support, which is quite telling, isn't it? That what they're learning in your group and from other pregnant people is that their bodies are amazing and that they can trust themselves to have a baby at home, often by themselves, with the confidence to know that they can do it.
Yeah, so some people have chosen to free birth. We have, and what I found interesting, both in context of supported home birth with a midwife and free birth, is we've had people in this coming. I've had people in this. I run a course for free birth. I set it up at the start of this. We'll go into that in a bit more. But what I find is people who are coming to us from a place of fear initially are scared of hospital, are scared of home birth as well. But they come into the free birth course and also to the home birth group, and they're then birthing from a place of power. So actually what they get through education is a mindset change. That, they learn enough that they actually feel super comfortable and super confident. The free birth before arrival, if they're told there might not be a midwife, they'll say, well, do you know what, I'm going to phone, and you can either send a midwife, but I'm staying home. And they have these beautiful, beautiful, empowered free birth. I call them the new breeds of free birthers, the free birthers who come to it for a different reason, but are just as valid as all of the people who see free birth as a philosophy, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredibly empowering. I have always supported free birth anyway. I've been to a number of free births before lockdown myself, you know, where people they're not looking. And sometimes people think that when free birthers are hiring doulas, they're looking for replacement medical care, or that they're looking for a replacement midwife. I often get asked by midwives, you know, you're not allowed to act as a midwife, don't you? Well, that's why I'm a doula, yeah, not a midwife. But I've got no interest in the medical. I'm not there to replace the medical care of a midwife. Often they just want a traditional wise woman, really, is what they're looking for when they hire me to go to their free birth. Don't forget, I'm a 50-year-old woman with long grey hair. Often when my clients hire me, they're looking for a mother figure. Yeah, so they're looking for that replacement for their own mothers quite often, and they want somebody who's given birth, who's been there before, and is just there in the traditional space that a non-medical wise woman would have been.
So what is the legal status of a free birth?
Free birth in this country is completely and utterly and entirely legal. Whatever you personally think about it, babies in this rights have no legal in this country have no, so I'm going to start again. Free birth in this country is completely legal. Whatever your own personal views, fetuses while they're still in the womb have no legal rights in the UK. So a woman is entirely free to make her own birth choices up to the point of the baby actually being born. There is a common misconception, and I am fully aware that there are people out there who think that free birth is illegal. We've had issues in group with midwives lifting comments, not anymore at the start of lockdown, lifting comments out of the group and contacting women privately and telling them that free birth is illegal and that they're going to report them to social services, and that is utterly inaccurate. And the Royal College of Midwives have subsequently issued a statement making it very clear that free birth is a legal choice in this country.
Yes.
It's very legal.
So in terms of what you described just now, so when you've got, let's say, a planned home birth where the couple phone in labour to say, we're in labour, can you send a midwife? The kind of scenarios that you just described is where actually a midwife is not sent out potentially. Is that, can you talk us through that a little bit?
So yeah, so what we're getting, we have had some scenarios where trusts have pulled home births and people have phoned in at the last minute and said, I am in established labour, I'm having a baby, I'm not coming in, can you send a midwife? And to be fair to the trust, some of the trusts, even where home birth has been closed, if they've had a midwife available, have chosen and made the active choice to support that family's choices and send a midwife. Equally, we have trusts that say they're short-staffed, they're too busy. People phone up in labour and they say, oh, there's nobody available until 8 o'clock in the morning. You have to come in, use of the word have, and we're not sending a midwife, you know. And what I noticed recently, there was at least one thread in the home birth group where the trust said, if you make this decision, we won't send an ambulance either. And that's an out-and-out lie. You know, if you phone up in labour and say, I'm having a baby right now, can you send an ambulance? They're going to send someone. I'm not saying you're going to get an ambulance in 2 minutes. You might not come at, you know, you might not come at the top of the priority list, but an ambulance will come. And some of our members just decide that they're going to stay at home and have their babies with or without a midwife and with or without an ambulance. So they just, what I always say to them is, if you're going to do that, you have to make it really clear you're not going in, so that they know there's no ambiguity between you and the ward. They're not there thinking you're coming in and you're there thinking they might send a midwife. Yeah, it has to be made abundantly clear to them you are not going to go in the middle of your birth.
Somebody listening to this podcast might think, what a bizarre idea that you would choose to give birth at home without any assistance from medical care. But of course, one of the things that we see as doulas all the time is how clever a woman's body is, how physiological birth is actually, you know, sort of very, very safe and amazing. And in fact, going into hospital is possibly more dangerous than giving birth at home with no medical care, because actually when a woman, just like any other mammal, is left to her own devices, that's when the magic happens. when you're kind of preparing families to give birth in this way, how do you prepare them, especially if you've got one of them is a little bit unsure?
So I talk a lot about creating a safe, supportive environment. Actually, I don't know if I'm unusual, but as a birth worker, as a doula, as an antenatal teacher, I actually don't talk about positions that women can adopt in birth. I work much more on focusing on a woman following her own body and her own instincts, and that if we listen to our own bodies, if we listen to ourselves, that we know what to do. I'm personally quite open to the talk of pain in birth as well. Which also as a hypnobirthing teacher, some hypnobirthing teachers are comfortable with that and some aren't. But what my concern there lies is that if we don't talk about pain and then it does hurt, then women are left reeling and thinking that something is going wrong, when actually I explain about it being a positive pain, and it's the pain that makes you move your butt or shift your leg or hang off the top of a door or whatever it is that you need to do. And that's all part of listening to yourself. And that you're going with the messages and the signals that your own body is sending you, whatever you want to call them. And a lot of my focus is on that, is on going with your own body, creating a warm, safe environment. And then I do personally talk about things that can, so for me, birth is perfectly safe. And when something does happen, then we have medical staff to help us. Yeah. So I say that birth should be at home for the vast majority of people, and then medical intervention saves lives for the few who need it, rather than the current situation we have, which is very few births happen at home, and most births happen with a lot of medical intervention. And I do talk about what might be a cause for transfer. And I always start all of mine, because obviously as a doula, I have no medical training. Yeah. So, my staff always says, if you're worried, phone for help. If you're worried, call an ambulance. But, I've been to four or five free births personally myself. Yeah. And they've all, because unfortunately, a lot of intervention is caused by intervention. It's known as, Sally Ann, it's called the cascade of intervention. So as soon as we start intervening, we create a situation where we're more likely to intervene. And what I do discuss a lot as well is those births that happen really quickly, those births that happen fast, and this are the ones where the baby is invariably fine. Yeah, it's the ones that are long and drawn out and go on for days and days, where sometimes the babies struggle. If your baby flies out before anybody gets there, then you haven't had a problem. Yeah, sometimes it's a bit shocking, but it's not a problem. So I talk a lot about believing yourself, listening to your body, your instinctual power, your power as a birthing woman or person, and that you know how to give birth. We know how to give birth. It's in our blood. As generations gave birth before us, that DNA memory is inside of us already.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people who may choose to give birth in this way are actually traumatized by a previous birth experience and lack trust in general in the medical profession. Is that your experience?
No, no, because although the people I work with birth trauma do not want the same thing to happen again, actually quite a lot of them are coming from a place that they were completely traumatized and they feel that they might need help. My experience of free birthing women is that they are coming from a place of believing in their own power to give birth. However, I do work with people who have been so traumatized by the maternity services that they don't want them anywhere near them. That does happen, but the vast majority of people I work with who free birth are coming from a place of, I am in my own power and I'm going to birth that way. So that said, I've worked with birth trauma survivors, if you like, or survivors of obstetric violence who start coming at free birth from a place of fear, and again come to that place of power through work, yeah, and learning and education, and often unpicking their own last birth. Because usually when you get to the root cause of most birth trauma, it's caused by medical intervention, and in my personal non-evidence-based opinion, going right back to a sweep. When birth starts with a sweep, I often think that we've got a birth that hasn't started with the baby in the right position. I liken it, I was talking about it yesterday, quite late last night. I liken it to if you're starting a race and you go 1, 2, 3 and somebody fires the firing gun and then you run, yeah, and somebody goes 1, 2, 3 and then pushes you, you might finish the race, but you're not going to have done it in your best way. And to me, starting birth with a sweep is that. It's that it can start it off, but not in its own time and in its own space.
That's very insightful, and I think very, very good way of describing it, because they often are one of the very first interventions, but also they deny the woman's body autonomy. It's almost like from the outset, she's being told, we're going to do something physical to you because we can. And once you've said yes to that, you're more likely to accept many other things as well. I think it's a really slippery slope, isn't it?
I think it's all part of creating a psychological culture in which we are taking away birthing power. So many things that I read online are, the sweep started my birth. I wouldn't have had my baby without that sweep, the sweep, the sweep, the sweep, the sweep. And what we're telling women and birthing people is that we cannot give birth without somebody sticking out their fingers into our vagina and trying to separate our cervix from our membranes in order to start the birth process. We are telling everybody with our talk of routine sweeps from, there are trusts now sweeping women from 38 weeks. 38 weeks. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. And what we're saying to those people is, you're broken. You need us to do this to you. And it just puts it into people's minds that they need assistance all of the time. So even before we start talking about the physical, we start talking about the mindset. When you've got midwives booking inductions in at 37 weeks, saying to people there's something wrong before we're anywhere near that point, that message all of the time. And that's what concerns me, to be honest, the most about current maternity practice from consultants and midwives, is that constant message that we are looking for what's wrong all of the time. Test after test and appointment after appointment, looking for what's wrong, not what's right.
Yes.
If that makes sense. And it really worries me, because we're creating this culture in which women are spending the vast majority of their pregnancies in fear. Fear of birth, fear of something going wrong, fear of this, fear of that, fear of group strep week, fear of gestational diabetes, fear of low iron, fear of the birth process itself. And let's not even start about physiological third stages. We could be here all week.
I think physiological third stage is really interesting to me. It's one of my big passions. And what I notice is that if the baby is left to transition on its own, the outcomes are always going to be better anyway. So even a baby that's slow to breathe, is that slow, or is that just normal? Because actually that transitional process is happening in its own way, and the baby hasn't been forced to start breathing because its oxygen supply has been cut and removed. So I could, like you, I could get on and chat about that all day. But yeah, I think that certainly when pregnant people and their partners start learning all of these wonderful things about how birth is meant to be, that's when they start recognizing that there are many decisions they can be making to support physiological birth and help themselves to achieve an amazing experience rather than the terrible ones that they're hearing from friends and family. So yes, very interesting conversation. What do you recommend that a couple do when they're considering planning their birth, be it a home birth, be it a free birth, be it any birth? What do you recommend?
Join my home birth support group UK. That's number one at the top of my list, where you get a beautiful supportive environment for all of your questions. Contact your local doula, whether you're planning to hire a doula or not, or an online doula or a virtual doula, but speak to somebody who's really well versed in birth rights, because I honestly believe the first affirmation in my affirmation set says, you are not allowed to not allow me. Yeah, it's the very first one. And I honestly believe that once you know your birth rights, before you even start looking at birth, that you're in a better place to understand everything else that follows. Once you understand that it is your body, your baby, your journey, and your birth, then everything else falls into place. Once you understand that you can say no to anything that makes you uncomfortable, and that actually you can say yes to everything that you want to do and that makes you comfortable. And a lot of that comes from education. Yeah, you know, so many people I speak to that on their third, fourth babies, people who join my group, sometimes fifth, sixth babies, and they say, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to have a VE, to not have a VE. They didn't know that they could refuse somebody access to their own vagina, which to me is a sacred area. You know, we've lost the sacred. Birth is, for me, birth is a sacred, magical, spiritual experience, and embrace it. You've taken 2 cells and you've created life. You've already made magic. If you can do that, you can do anything. That's what I tell birthing women and people all of the time. That's my top tip. I've obviously got a free birth course, which is about £35 for those having a baby. It's a bit more for birth workers that I recommend that people join. Preparation, for me, education is key. So when we look at all of the things that have better outcomes, hypnobirthing, doulas, home birth, but all of the things that those have in common is education. All of those people who are using all of these are better educated, and they know about birth and they understand how their rights in their own bodies. Get educated and get informed. That's my top tips. Education, education, education. And that's what you get out of my group, and books and lots of other things. And Sally Ann's got a really good book as well on being a birth partner.
Thank you. That's a great plug there. It's interesting actually, because you know, running a group, and I'm a member of your group, and being in that group, the amount of questions that come up on a daily basis about, you know, experiences where they've had an appointment that day, and they've been told something, maybe they've had a measurement and their baby is measuring too big or too small, or, you know, when you find situations that come up in the group, like what's your recommendations that people do when they've been spooked or scared about the baby not growing or developing appropriately in a medical professional's eyes?
Well, firstly, because of the way the group's set up, the group itself is an incredible resource bank of information. So I there's different places in my group that I can send people to read evidence-based information, birth stories from other people who've been in their situation. And our group is open to all experiences. So for our members whose birth don't end up at home, we have a positive induction section. We have change pathways before birth. We've got a section on some of our members, because of medical needs of the baby that don't impact on their birth but mean they will need care afterwards. We call them planned transfers after birth. So the first thing I do within my group is point people at the right part to go and get the evidence that they need. And then what I suggest to them to do is to turn around to their consultant or their midwife or whoever it is who's using scary, emotive, shroud-bleeding language, because that's invariably what comes up most, is to say to them, can you please give me the evidence-based paper for what you are suggesting so that I can read it and make my own informed decision? And hospital guidelines are not evidence. Hospital guidelines are hospital guidelines. I could write a guideline and stick it on my front door. That's what a hospital guideline is. And evidence is different. And you need the evidence, because some of the stuff that people post in my group, quite frankly, a lie. They are lied to on a regular basis, my members, all of the time, daily. People in that group are lied to. And it's much harder to lie when somebody's asking you for the evidence and you haven't got it. And invariably, that's what happens. They ask for the evidence-based papers and they find that nobody's got the evidence for what's being suggested, because it's usually outrageous, to be honest. It alternatively breaks my heart and makes me furious at the same time sometimes as well. The disrespect, and you know, things like, I've got a letter today for a consultant's appointment and I don't know what it's for. What would you do? And I say, if you weren't pregnant and a random consultant's appointment letter turns up for you, would you just go? Or would you want to find out what it was that consultant wanted to speak to you about? As pregnant people, you don't lose your body autonomy, you don't lose your brain and your intelligence. I suggest that you ask an awful lot of questions before you trustingly just hand yourself over to this quite patriarchal system that we have that assumes that they care about your baby more than you do. Sorry, I'm ranting now, aren't I? always
That's
ranting
okay.
lately.
I'm loving the examples. Have you got any more examples?
Oh, my baby's too big. You know, that my baby's too big. Your baby's so enormous that you must come in for an induction to prevent shoulder dystocia, when induction is a risk factor for shoulder dystocia. So actually, the cure is documented by the Royal College of Gynecologists as a risk for what it is they're trying to prevent. But of course, nobody tells them that. That's one thing that really infuriates me. And also that the Royal College of Gynecologists and NICE guidelines, so their own guidelines currently say very clearly in both papers, induction for size alone is not recommended. Yeah, that's, I could give you thousands of, you know, I'm too old, can't have a baby because I'm at home, because I'm 40, because my baby will die, not might die, could die, not has a 0.25, I think it's 0.25, but don't quote me on that stat, slightly increased risk, will die. Yeah. Oh, frequent. If I went to my they said to me page and flipped it up, you know, your baby's going to die. And that's the thing, that you don't want your baby to die, or turn into a partner and saying, how would you feel? How would you feel? You wouldn't want anything, because then there's that divide and conquer technique as well, where if they can find a chink between the two people, then just the whole thing, big baby, you know, well, as I say, induction for big baby, small baby, big dad, small dad. I've heard big mum, small mum, or day with a Y in it. It's the bank holiday. Yeah. We don't do cesareans on the weekend, so we better induce you 3 days early just in case you need one. Things like that, which are all just outrageous and not accurate. And that's what bothers me. I am all for women being given evidence and birthing people being given evidence-based information so that they can make informed decisions. I'm not saying that risks should be hidden from people, but what we do need to bear in mind is that risk is relative. And also within birth, all of these risks are less than 0.5%. So 99.5%, none of this is going to happen. And what I found interesting, I'm in the middle of writing a course, and I was doing some research on breech babies in the context of creating a breech baby unit. And what I discovered was that the risk of needing an emergency cesarean after an ECV is 1 in 200, which is exactly the same risk as a placental abruption in a VBAC. And yet an ECV is promoted as safe, and a VBAC is suggested to be dangerous. So dangerous, it has to happen in a hospital. And I just found it really interesting that those two stats are the same. And although the current risk, if you look at the latest papers on VBAC, is 0.2% of it for abruption, that one is promoted as safe because the NHS wants you to do it, and one is promoted as unsafe because they don't.
That really is very interesting. I always think it's important to know about stats and how stats are offered to any pregnant person and their birth partner, because often they are given in such a interesting way when they say, oh, your risk is double, you know, and actually what they mean is it's gone from 0.2 to 0.4%, you know, and that's, it's just scary how people can be pushed into situations. I mean, the word coercion, I've written about it in my book, and you know, we use it a lot in a language around you know, pregnant people now, and it is become a really common phrase that's heard in many circles, you know, within the world that we mix in. And it's important to understand exactly what coercion means, because you know, you said before about the letter coming through your door for an appointment you didn't know about, that's been made for you, about you, and you're not even aware why you're being invited to that meeting or what, you know, what it's about. And these really simple phrases that, you know, hop up on the bed, I'm going to examine you, they sound so harmless. They sound so, you know, why wouldn't you comply? When in fact, there's nothing about hopping on the bed and having a vaginal examination that is acceptable when somebody doesn't understand, firstly, why that's a decision that they should be making, not anyone else on their behalf. And secondly, what can stem from that, because as you know, in your group, you often hear about pregnant people who are given a vaginal examination and at the same time, unbeknownst to them, also are given a sweep and potentially even having their waters broken without any consent whatsoever. And I think that's why
And I pulled
podcasts
your,
like this are so important. Sorry, Sam, what were you going to say?
and I pulled your cervix forward. Oh, I couldn't give you a sweep, but I just pulled your cervix forward. Did you ask? Before you did that to me, did you ask? Or some of the things I've witnessed in the birth room, which I have intervened in, midwives asking women if they can break their waters while their hands are in their vagina while they're contracting. You know, no, that is not acceptable. That is not a conversation you can have with your hand already. That is a conversation you have before you do that, before your hand's inside, not while, not during, because that's so coercive. How is a woman mid-contraction supposed to really focus on anything you're saying and give any sort of consent whatsoever? The lack of consent and the amount of coercion, and it's just so normalized. And my other favorite, particularly if we're talking about coercion, is I have to book your induction. I have to do this. It's my protocol. I have to. No, they don't. If you're declining induction, no one has to book you an induction. And you can go in and cancel it, because what that means is you're going to go in and be subjected to horrendous badgering, partly because they're expecting you to be induced. You've gone into an appointment and you get there thinking, oh, you can just cancel it, and you get bombarded with dead baby talk instead. And it's very hard to get out. And women are turning up for what they think is a chat. They'll find out they've been booked onto the induction ward. And my other favourite, I could go on about this forever, is things like, when you come to the induction ward, we'll talk through your options. No, yeah? Before you come to the induction ward, we'll talk through your options. We'll talk through what your rights are. We'll talk through the pros and cons of every single step of the induction process so that you can make an informed decision about whether you want it, whether you want to start it, and if at any point you want to move to cesarean. But none of this seems to happen. And it's wrong. When my husband went in for his hernia operation, he was talked through all of the different options. Well, he wasn't actually talking through all of the different options, but he was talked about the pros and cons. He was talked to about how long he might be in hospital. He was talked to about how long he would have to rest afterwards. He knew everything. And then actually he said to me, oh, I'm having it under general. And I said, why? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, I want you to ring them and I want you to find out. So we rang them and they said, because that's the way we do it. And I said, well, I'm not happy with that, because I don't see why you need a general to have a hernia op when women can have full-blown cesareans without. And as it turned out, the anaesthetist was happy to do it under local anaesthetic, and my husband ended up having it under a spinal. But that was all negotiated in advance before he stepped foot in the hospital. And yet we bring women in, go, oh, we've just booked you in for an induction, which can take 7 to 10 and more days, which is a massively interventionist process. And I'm not anti-induction. I've got 6 or 7 positive induction stories on my website, because if women are being induced, I think they need to know how to have a positive induction. But you can't have a positive induction if you're going in on a Monday morning and you think that you're going to have your baby in your arms by Monday night, because what they said to you is, oh, your baby might die if you don't be induced. Well, just induce you and you'll get to meet that baby. And actually, 7 days later, you're still in hospital and still pregnant, thinking all along that your baby might die. That you can never have a positive induction in that situation. That is mostly what happens. Mostly women go in thinking they're having their baby that day, and 6 days, 5 days, 4 days, 3 days later, they have their babies. It's completely unacceptable. And yet it's the norm.
Absolutely. Before I wrap this up, I want to ask you my last question, which is the same for everybody that I interview. And it's basically based on the birth partner. What top tip can you give to any birth partner about labour and birth?
That you are important by being there. If your presence makes the person giving birth feel safer, that is the absolute key role. You are the space holder. You are the person there to protect the space of the birthing person. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. There are loads of lovely things that you can do, but ultimately keeping them safe is your primary role, in my opinion. That's my top tip.
Thank you. Where can people find you?
On my Facebook page, which is Samantha Gadsden Doula, in my groups, on my website, which is kafilidoula.co.uk at the moment. I'm having it redeveloped, so that might change. But the best place to find me, to be honest, I'm also on Instagram as Samantha Gadsden Doula, the Home Birth Support Group UK. Put it this way, if you Google Samantha Gadsden Doula, you will find me, because I'm all over Google, everywhere.
And you run some really great courses and also offer one-to-one sessions, don't you?
Yeah, one of my most favourite services, one of my most popular services, I do a 1 hour chat. We call it Chat with Sam, where people get to fire questions at me and I answer them to the best of my ability. And while I'm talking to them, I've usually got my laptop switched on behind me and I'm just providing links or maybe an affirmation or something that just backs up what we're talking about. I just ordered a dual monitor setup so that I can do it easier. And that is actually a really, people don't think you can change somebody's life in an hour, but you really can. Well, I can, and I think a lot of other birth workers can. And I'm also do a very specific type of birth trauma work, which is really popular. They said at the beginning, birth trauma, which is quite hippie and quite alternative, but I find it, I made it up myself. I'm not a counsellor or a therapist, but it's really effective and it really works. I can't promise, I would never promise, but so far, everybody I've worked with has felt better after they've done it. I'm more able to have a positive birth afterwards, or even to get pregnant. Yeah, my most favourite birth trauma one that I did, I was contacted by somebody and she was so traumatised. She was so traumatised and she contacted me and she said, I'd like to have another baby, but I'm just too scared to get pregnant. So we did some antenatal work before, and we also did some birth trauma work about letting go of trauma. And she's, oh, as I left, she said to me, and I work a lot online as well now, and she said to me, I think I'll be ready to have a baby next year. Next year, I'm going to have a baby. I feel much better now. And then the next month, she messaged me to say she was pregnant with twins.
Oh, wow.
That was my favorite ever. It was incredible. She just let go of it all. And then she had a beautiful birth. She did have a planned cesarean, but it was beautiful and it was exactly what she wanted. But she'd lost that fear of getting pregnant in the first place. And the cesarean was linked to the type of twins. So it wasn't, but she messaged me, she had a lovely birth. She loved her cesarean and she loved her birth. And she didn't think that that was possible when she met me. So
it really does make a difference to speak to somebody like you and, you know, feel empowered and to take ownership. And by hearing how you can take ownership is really, really important. And, you know, making sure that nothing is done to you without your permission.
We've talked a lot about coercion and the negative side of birth, but birth is absolutely magical. For me, birth is a liminal space. So a liminal space is a portal between two worlds. And when the baby's head is out and the body is in, or in a breech birth, when the body is out and the head is in, I really, really believe that the time when the baby is between two places, it's a place where it's still part of the birthing mum, the birthing person, and it's also part of this world as well. It's a transition point, and it's magic. It's I say to people, birth is amazing and it's beautiful and it's smelly and it's sweaty and, you know, and it has fluids and it's magic. It's just magic and it's incredibly, incredibly beautiful. However it happens, including cesareans. Yeah, as long as you are supported to make an informed choice. Birth is incredible. I love it. I spend my entire life immersed in it because I love it so much. It's really important to say everything. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's been amazing. I'm so glad that you agreed to come on and talk to me, because it's just a joy to speak to somebody with very similar philosophies and to help spread the word that, you know, women are strong and capable and they just need to step into that power.
Yes, they are. We are. Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sam. Bye.